So today we're going to dive into the really heavy topic of trauma, but we're going to start our journey in a place you would probably never expect.
Believe it or not, this is a story about the deep, deep wounds that war and loss can leave on a person. And yeah, it all begins with one of the most beloved fantasy tales of all time.
To really understand this connection, we have to start with the author himself, J.R.R. Tolkien, and the experiences that completely shaped his entire world.
Now, we all know Tolkien as the genius behind modern fantasy, right? The guy who gave us hobbits and elves. But before any of that, he was a young, reluctant soldier in World War I. He fought in the Battle of the Somme. One of the single bloodiest battles in all of human history. The experience left him with just unimaginable shock, guilt, and the grief of losing almost all of his closest friends.
It took him years, literally years, to even begin to process what he'd been through. And his way of doing that? It was to create Middle-earth. His legendary novels were, in a lot of ways, a byproduct of his trauma. It was his way of grappling with human nature, the absolute horrors of war, and the idea that maybe, just maybe, there's a possibility of growth even after a devastating loss. And while this one quote from his character Frodo Baggins just captures the heart of that struggle so perfectly, it's this central, gut-wrenching realization for anyone who's ever endured trauma. You can survive it, sure, but you can never, ever be the same person you were before.
Okay, so Tolkien's experience is this incredibly powerful, personal story. But what he was feeling, well, now it has a clinical name. So let's take a look at how that very personal struggle gets translated into a formal diagnosis.
What Tolkien's generation just called shell shock, we now understand as post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD. And we have to be really clear here. It is not just for veterans. It's a disorder that can come up after any traumatic event, whether you experienced it firsthand or you just witnessed it. So, according to the official diagnosis, the symptoms usually fall into four main groups. First, you've got reliving the event, through intrusive memories or nightmares that just won't go away. Second is avoidance, where you find yourself actively staying away from people or places that remind you of what happened. Third is arousal, which is this state of being constantly on edge, irritable, maybe you can't sleep. And then finally, you have these negative changes in mood and thought, like this overwhelming guilt or fear, or just totally losing interest in things you used to love.
And beyond those four main clusters, people with PTSD can also go through a bunch of other things, like emotional numbing, where you just feel kind of flat, or dissociation, which is a really bizarre feeling where the world doesn't seem real, or maybe time feels like it's speeding up or slowing way down. Some people even have blackouts.
Now, when all these symptoms are left untreated, the suffering can become absolutely unbearable. And that kind of desperation can lead a person down another really difficult path, the link between trauma and addiction.
And it's not hard to see why, right? If your mind is constantly replaying the worst moment of your life, you'd probably feel desperate for any way to just turn it off. For some people, substance use becomes that coping mechanism. It's a form of self-medication to try and numb that pain.
And that connection is incredibly strong. The numbers, they really tell a sobering story. For veterans, it's about 2 in 10.
And what that number means is that more than 2 out of every 10 U.S. veterans with PTSD also struggle with substance abuse problems. This isn't some rare thing. It's a common and just devastating cycle.
And what's wild is that the connection goes both ways. About a third of veterans who are seeking treatment for substance abuse also have PTSD. It really shows that you often can't treat one of these problems without addressing the other. They are just that deeply intertwined.
And it's really crucial to understand that addiction isn't just about drugs or alcohol. It's defined as any compulsive, hard-to-control behavior that starts to mess with your life, your work, your health, your relationships. It could be anything from substance use to gambling or even shopping. It's so often a symptom of a much deeper struggle.
So this all raises a really fundamental question. Why? Why do some people develop PTSD after a trauma, while other people who go through something similar are able to move on? Well, the answer, it's complicated. To help us understand, let's look at the story of Brandon, an Air Force drone operator. For 6 years, he watched the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan on a screen, from a bunker thousands of miles away in the American Southwest. He was never in any physical danger, and yet he was diagnosed with severe PTSD. So how is that possible?
Well, Brandon's case highlights this really key concept called moral injury. And the idea here is that trauma isn't just about what was done to you. It can also be about what you did or maybe what you failed to do for others. It's a wound to your conscience, and that can be just as damaging as any physical threat.
On a biological level, trauma can literally change your brain's wiring. The limbic system, that's kind of our emotional center. It can get stuck in overdrive, just flooding your body with stress hormones. And at the same time, the hippocampus, which is so important for memory, can actually get damaged or even shrink. This might be why those traumatic memories don't get filed away like normal ones. They stay vivid and fresh, always ready to replay as flashbacks.
So who's at risk? Well, it's really a combination of things. There might be genetic predispositions. Your environment matters a ton. Someone with a history of childhood abuse might be more vulnerable. And your personal coping style plays a huge role. A tendency to just suppress and avoid difficult feelings often makes the symptoms way worse.
But here's the most important part of this whole story. It does not have to end there. Despite all the pain and all the difficulty, there is a path forward. There is hope for growth, for picking up the threads of an old life and weaving them into something totally new.
You see, for every person who experiences post-traumatic stress, there is also the possibility of what psychologists call post-traumatic growth. And this isn't about ignoring the pain at all. It's about finding positive psychological changes as a result of struggling with that pain. Things like a new appreciation for life, stronger relationships, or a deeper sense of who you are.
And this brings us right back around to where we started. J.R.R. Tolkien is a perfect example of this. He took the immense trauma and loss he suffered on the battlefield and he channeled it into stories that have helped millions of us understand the very nature of good and evil and hope. He found growth through his struggle.
And so we end where we began, with that same realization from Frodo. There is no going back. Trauma can absolutely shatter a life, but the human spirit is resilient. The ultimate question isn't how do we get back what was lost? The real question is, what new and maybe even stronger life can be built from the pieces left behind?